So, hi, Catherine. Thank you for joining me on the podcast again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back.
Oh, I love returning guests. Um, but for anyone who hasn't listened to your first episode, or even anyone who has and just needs a little refresher, can you please give a reintroduction to yourself, your business, and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Erdly. I'm the founder of the Resilient Retail Club, which is my membership group and mastermind for product businesses. This is my 24th year in the retail industry. I'm a small business and retail expert. I spent nearly 2 decades working in big retailers on their stock management, sales strategy, profitability. And now I work exclusively with independent startup retailers and brands to help them to do the same, have more sales, have more profit, manage their stock effectively, feel less stressed, more cash, less stress. That's the idea.
All right. Thank you so much. And I'm glad you touched on sales. That's exactly what I've invited you on to talk about today, and in particular, sales planning.
Yes.
So let's get straight in, if you don't mind, Catherine, with why do you need a sales plan and why do you need a sales goal? Why is this important?
Yes, absolutely. So people often say to me, well, my goal is just to sell as much as I possibly can, which I totally understand. I'm sure we all feel the same. But how do you know when you've hit that goal? There's lots of different reasons for having a sales plan, but one of the top ones really is because when do you know when to celebrate? When do you know when to actually say, right, I did what I was going to do? Whereas if you say, oh, I just want to sell as much as I can, like you'll just never know, basically. You'll never really know whether or not you've hit that. So I think that's the first thing, just to have that real tangible sense of achievement. The second reason is that imagine if you were trying to hit an actual goal or an actual target, like if you had a bow and arrow, for example, and you couldn't see the target, then there's no way that you'd ever be able to hit it. So it's the same in business. If you don't know what you're aiming for, how do you know how to hit it? And I think also something else that happens during the sales planning process, which is a really wonderful, can be a wonderful creative process for small business owners, is it forces you to look at things like your seasonality. So, for example, if you're going to make a plan for the year, it allows you to see, right, which are my busy months and which are my quiet months. And it can be as simple as saying, well, actually, I know that August is always my quietest month. So if I'm setting myself a sales plan, I can actually go ahead and assign less sales to the month of August because actually I want to be on holiday for 2 weeks. I want things to be a bit quieter. And that's actually a real positive, and it feels much more controlled than getting to August and thinking, oh my goodness, why am I not getting as many sales? And it all just feels a bit hectic. So sales plans, they help you with your motivation, they help you with that clarity, making sure that you can hit those goals. They can also help you be really realistic about the overall seasonality of your business. And they can also just help you feel much more confident and calm and in control.
That's so helpful. Thank you. And I just realised I should ask an even more basic question, Catherine. So when we talk about a sales plan, are we
Yes.
really talking about thinking how many sales am I aiming for in any given quarter, maybe month of the
Yes.
upcoming year? So we're recording this for 2025. So is it looking
Yeah.
at the year and saying, I would like to get X amount of sales, and I predict I'll get this many in Q1, this many in Q2,
Yes.
etc.
Yeah, I personally like a monthly sales plan. I mean, if when I worked in big retailers, we had weekly sales plans that then got taken by the store teams and broken down into daily, hourly plans. I mean, in big retailers, they would break it down but literally by hour, and then they'd even assign it by member of staff. So how many sales was each member of staff going to do per hour per shop in order to roll that back up to the main overall plan. So big retailers get really, really super granular. I think for small business owners, a weekly sales plan can be trickier than a monthly sales plan because we all know you can have a quiet week and then a good week, and it's probably not good to really stress about it too much because there are just there are mysteries in this world, and one of them is why says one day you'll have a really quiet day and one day you'll have a busy day. And in a way, the days and even the weeks don't really matter. What matters is the longer term chunks of time, so like the months. So when we're talking about sales plan, I would like to see it by month. I would like to see it ideally by sales channel. So for example, if you do your website and wholesale, then you would probably want to do yourself a plan for both of those. If you sell on Amazon, and on Etsy and on your own website, have a plan for each one of those that you can then add all together so you know what you're overall aiming for. So I would say ideally sales plan by channel that then adds all up to a number per month, and then that will give you your number per year as well.
That makes a lot of sense, Catherine. Thank you. And because I think you're right, a month seems much more achievable than a week, especially as a small business owners.
Yeah.
Lots of us might want to be flexible. We might not, there might be a week where we can work less because there's something else going on
Yeah.
or whatever it is. And I think you're right. If you're aiming for targets every week and you're for any reason not hitting them, that can feel really demotivating. Whereas a month is a pretty good chunk of time.
Yeah, a month helps you kind of even out a few of those like idiosyncrasies that you get on the day to day and the week to week. So it allows you to just have an idea of how you're doing. When I work with people one-on-one, I do a lot of, so people in my mastermind, for example, I work with them very closely, making their sales plans and things like that. I would say the majority of people will work on a monthly basis. There will be a few exceptions for people who have, for example, maybe fashion, where they have a fashion drop and it's going to come in and hit, and then they're going to see their sales over a certain period of weeks. And that we might want to look at the weeks because we need to react quickly if something's doing well. But I'd say for the vast majority of people that work with a monthly plan is better. And I'm a big believer as when it comes to plans that simple and used is way better than complex and nobody ever looks at it, because you can create all kinds of very, very complicated sales plans. And I have in my life created many, many very in-depth and detailed sales plans when I worked in big retailers, but there's no point doing that in a small business. I'd rather you write on a post-it note, I want to take 5K this month, and stick it on your monitor, than to have a hugely convoluted, complex plan that just never gets looked at.
That makes sense. Thank you. And we'll talk a little bit more in a moment because I have got some questions actually about what should we include in our sales plan? Because I'm thinking that we can probably be as simple as I want to make X amount a month, or we could maybe
Yeah.
get slightly more detailed. So we'll definitely go into that. So something else I'd really like to know is, so some of my listeners have maybe been running their business for a number of years. Some might be just starting out. In fact, perhaps, product hasn't even launched yet, or is launching early next year. Super, super exciting.
Yeah.
Does it matter what stage your business is at when it comes to creating a sales plan? So firstly, would you have one right from day one? And secondly, I guess on the other side, if you've been in business for a couple of years and you sort of, you're forecasting, do you still need one?
So it's a great question. So I think when you're first starting out, you should still set yourself a sales plan. And the reason for that is, again, it helps you with your motivation. It helps you get really clear about things. The reason that what's going to be different though when you first start out is you're going to have to be working on some basic assumptions. So from that I mean, and this is one of the things that people find really tricky about sales plans. They're like, well, how do I come up with a forecast? Well, a forecast is basically an educated guess. And also the other thing to say about sales plans, and I'll come on to this a bit more later, is the purpose of a sales plan is actually not to be right, because you're never going to get it right. We used to have this game that we used to play when I worked in one particular retailer, and every week we would guess the exact number that our department was going to take that week, and the person who got the closest got to use this disco calculator for the week, which looked a bit like the dance floor from Saturday Night Fever, and then you could press the buttons and they all lit up different colors. So as you can imagine, this was hotly contested, who got the disco calculator. But the point is that we would all guess like who could get the closest to the amount of money we were going to take. And of course, nobody ever got it completely right. Nobody was ever on the nose. So when you are doing a sales forecast, you're never going to get it right. You're never going to say, I'm going to take £3,000 this month and take exactly £3,000. You're just looking for an educated guess of an amount that you think is about right, so that you can make other plans in the business accordingly. So when you're first starting out and you maybe haven't really got going yet, you can still forecast. It's just you're going to have to be building out based on some assumptions. So for example, you might say, right, I think I'm going to get, I don't know, I reckon, let's say I get 50 people coming to my website, or let's say 100 people coming to my website a week, let's say I'm going to, that's going to be my goal that I'm going to go for to start off with. Right. Conversion rates, the percentage of people buying compared to the number of people coming is around 2% for an average e-commerce business. Okay, let's assume I do 2%, then okay, I'll get 2 sales, and I reckon most people will buy, I don't know, 2 items. They're £30 each. I think it's going to be £60 a sale. I think that I'm going to take £120 a week to start off with, right? So that's built on loads and loads of assumptions. You've assumed your web traffic, you've assumed your conversion rate, you've assumed your average transaction value, you've assumed your number of purchases. So you've got all of these different assumptions, but you can put them in and you can start creating a plan. Now, when it actually starts, you're going to see different things happening. Maybe you were wrong about the web traffic. Maybe you were wrong about the conversion. Maybe you were wrong about all of it. But you've suddenly now got some data that you can start feeding into these assumptions, so that as you go forward and as you're doing more forecasting and more planning, you can actually say, all right, well, actually, do you know what, my conversion rate is generally around 4%. So I think this looks more realistic. And over time you refine it and you get better and better at it. So if you've been going for a while, you're going to have loads of that data in your back pocket. You may not even need to get that granular. You might just say, okay, well, actually, I've been on like 10% up on the year for the last couple of years. I think that's going to keep going this year. Therefore, I'm going to plan in my sales like this. Roughly speaking, I reckon I'm going to be 10% up on every month. But now you've got a framework. The key thing is that you can kind of intelligently explain where that number came from. When I talk to people about their sales plans, I'm not looking for them to have, and really nailed it super precisely. But if somebody says to me, I'm going to be up 50% on the year, and I'm like, what are you basing that on? And they're like, I don't know, I just think I might be. Then that to me is a bit of a red flag.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And I liked what you said as well about the data, because it sounds like if someone is fairly new, maybe this is, they've just launched their products and they're forecasting out the year, they can, well, as all of us actually, the plans can change if the data dictates it. So for example, you think you're going to get 100 people come to your website per month. Let's say the first month you have 200 visitors.
Yeah.
And you double your sales target. You could, when you're looking at future months, you could take that into consideration. And of course, the same if it goes the other way. So
Yes.
it sounds like this is very much something you need to be on top of,
Yes.
reviewing, not creating in December, looking at again next December.
Yeah, and just not the magical thinking, because if somebody says like, I'm going to be 50% up on the year, and there's no basis to that, then that's, to me, suggests that there's risk in the plan. Whereas if they're like, well, because I've been 50% up so far, and every year I've been 50% up, or I'm going to spend more ads, or I'm going to start a new sales channel, and this is how much I think it's going to generate, or all of those things, then those are all ways that they've got something to back up that plus 50%. So I think you can, if you give 5 people who are very talented and experienced in forecasting the same number to forecast, they'll come up with 5 different answers, and that's okay. What you're looking for is the kind of rationale behind it. You're looking for people to have a logical reason for why they think they're going to take what they're going to take, to put a number in that seems reasonable, and then to react to it as you go along, which is really the purpose of having a sales plan.
Thank you, Catherine. And we'll definitely talk about how we use it going on. But that makes a lot of sense. I think the key thing I'm taking away here is that whatever number you put in, you have to be able to justify that. And when I say justify that, I don't mean you have to be able to say, I deserve this amount of money. I mean, justify it as in you're looking at the data, or what you think the data might look like. And you can explain where you got to the numbers. And actually, that sounds to me like a really sensible test once you've done your sales plan. Is to maybe explain it to somebody else, or even talk it through to yourself, but just to be able to say where those numbers came from, because I think it can be really tempting. And I've certainly done it, not with sales, but with, I don't know, numbers for things. It can be really easy to just pull a number out of thin air, can't it? I think we've all been guilty of that at some point. I'm sure I want X amount of followers, or I want whatever it is. And sometimes those numbers are very realistic, sometimes not. But I've definitely been in a situation where I know I've just picked a number out of thin air and it hasn't been based on anything factual.
Yeah.
And that's quite
And
dangerous.
that's, and that's okay. And there's an element of that. Look, often that happens. But what, as I said, like the real joy of doing it that way is that once if your number does vary from that, you get to kind of really dig in and go, well, why? And if it's based off a series of assumptions, you can see which one of your assumptions was correct or incorrect. And that then helps you refine it going forward. And so you get better and better. The more you do sales planning, the better you get at it.
And hopefully, as well, if you are making assumptions based on data, I hope as well that it would mean your assumptions might be more achievable, which would also give you more to
Mm,
celebrate, because I think that's really important as well.
yeah.
I think part of having a sales plan is, as you said, right at the beginning, being able to go, yay, I achieved what I
Yeah.
wanted to this month, or I exceeded it, and not to give yourself a hard time if you don't. But I think
No.
if you're forecasting, I don't want to say sensibly, but with you, if you're using data and
Yeah.
what is known to forecast, I think and hope you have a better chance of hitting it than if
Yeah.
you're guessing at numbers.
Yes. Yes, for sure.
So, thank you so much for everything you shared on sales plans so far. And now part of the reason that I'm actually what would be good to have this episode is I know that many people don't have sales plans.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've come across this as
Yes.
well. And for some people, actually, this might be quite a new concept, which is why I've asked some of the very sort of basic fundamental questions to get everyone thinking. What are some of the reasons you hear for people for not having sales plans? Because I'm sure there'll be people thinking, well, I don't need a sales plan. I'm doing great. I'm making X amount a month or
Yeah.
this many sales. Why do I need a plan?
Yeah.
What would your answer be to that, Catherine? And what other things do you hear, reasons why people just aren't keen?
People don't like to tempt fate. So that's when people say, well, what if I make that plan and I don't hit the number? And then I feel really disappointed, which I do understand. And I do think my feeling about sales plans is that they should have a level of excitement to them that you think, oh, if I hit this, that would be great, but not so much that it's just fear or just overwhelm or just, yeah, this is never going to happen, right? So, for example, if you've if you've set yourself, you're like, right, I'm going to double my sales, and that's not really based on anything other than the fact that you'd really like to double your sales, and every month you look at your number and you think, I'm just never going to hit that, then that's not very motivating. So you want it to have this sort of like little bit of excitement, little in the pit of your stomach, oh, if I hit this number, that would be amazing, but not that it's so far off that you just feel like you're never ever going to do it. And because it can be super motivating, like we touched on earlier, but like people who run shops, for example, will tell me that like on a Saturday, if their team know the target for the week, and then Saturday's the end of the week, then they kind of have that bit of real oomph to like, okay, I'm going to hit this goal. And I think that can be the same, even if you're working with yourself. I think as you get towards the end of the month, that motivation to put out an extra post or to do another listing or to send another email because you're like, oh, what if I can hit that goal? So yeah, so people definitely say that they don't like to tempt fate. People don't really get why it's a worthwhile use of their time. And I think yeah, those are the main objections really. It's the time, and it's also that fear about like, well, what if I don't want to write it down, I don't want to tempt fate if I get it wrong. And it's all fine. The other thing, well, why take the time to do it is we've talked about the motivational aspects, we've talked about the need to have a goal to actually be able to hit it, but then I think there's also some really key fundamental underpinnings to feeling like you've got control of your business that having a sales plan really helps with. So for example, one of the things that people often tell me is that they wish they could pay themselves more from their business. So they would like to pay themselves more from their product business, but they don't really necessarily feel that they can. And sometimes that's because, there's lots of reasons why that might be. Maybe their profit margins aren't high enough, their overheads could be too high, they could have spent too much money on stock. But sometimes it's also about the fact that they don't have any forward visibility. So they're nervous that if they take the money out, that then the money won't be available for them later on to spend. So one of the things that you can do with the sales plan is it's also one of the first steps in making a stock plan, which is where you set yourself a budget for how much stock you should have, because it should always, the answer to the question, how much stock I should have, which I get asked a lot, is always comes back to, well, what are your sales going to be? So a sales plan gets you a stock plan, which then gives you budget for how much to purchase, Once you've got how much you're going to be purchasing, you can build yourself a cash flow, a really good solid cash flow forecast, where you can say, this is what I'm planning to have come in every week. This is what my bills are on each week, any given week. And this is what my expenditure is going to be on stock based on my plan. And all of a sudden, you've gone from just looking at your bank account and thinking, I hope I'm going to have enough money to cover everything, to actually having a spreadsheet where you can see all of that information mapped out for you. And that, to me, is such a powerful position to be in as a small business owner, because you've got visibility. It helps you have confidence. It helps you make confident decisions about how much you can pay yourself, and actually see that you can take that money out and it will be replenished by sales. It helps you avoid mistakes such as stockpiling. It helps you really get to grips with what all of your expenditures are week on week. And it kind of takes you all the way from feeling quite out of control or like you're winging it, to feeling really in control, really confident, lots of clarity, and ideally more money as well, because you can really see almost like what the plan is before any of it happens. And that is none of that, all of that starts with a sales plan.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Catherine. I think you've convinced everybody. I think that I agree. I think that all sounds really empowering.
Sorry,
And we'll
sorry
talk,
about this.
don't worry.
Let me just kick her out.
And we'll talk in a moment as well about sort of how you use your sales plan. But I assume as well that if you are using your sales plan, like I said, we can go into more detail, is it will also help help you have a really clear picture of what's going on, what's working, what's not working.
Yes.
So we'll talk about that a bit more in a moment, but it'd be great to go cover, and we've talked about it already, but I'd like to talk a little bit about what you include in your sales plan. So is it as simple as, I'm selling on these channels and this is the number of sales I want to make on these channels per month?
Yeah.
Or do you need to go into more detail, or is there something else that sits behind it that's the how? I guess that's what I'm trying to get to, Catherine, is, are we looking at the numbers, or do we go into that and how am I going to achieve this?
I think there's twofold. I mean, I think that yes, in the most basic sense, a sales plan is, I usually do it in retail value. So I expect to take £1,000 on my own website, £2,000 on Amazon, and £500 on Etsy in January. So that would be it. When you build out a stock plan, you need a few other bits, but that's that. If we're talking specifically about a sales plan, then that's what we're talking about. We're talking about cash sales, by channel, by month, and that's pretty much it. Now, if you what you're talking about, the kind of how, that's what I would call building blocks. So in other words, if you're roughly speaking trading 20% up on the year, and that's just how it's been going, and your audience is growing and your traffic's growing and everything's kind of ticking along, growing nicely, then you plan that you're going to be 20% up on the year in January. Like, that almost doesn't really need much of an explanation. You can kind of go, right, I can see that. I'm just planning this along my what we call run rate. So run rate is basically how you're currently trading against the year. So I looked at last year's history. I looked at how I'm currently doing across the year. If you combine those two, this looks like a sensible number for January. When you do it that way, then you're not really necessarily having to talk too much about the how, because you kind of know, because it's just through regular growth, normal growth. Now, if you are then going to say, actually, I think January is going to be like plus 500%, then I would say at that point, you probably do have to. Why are you saying that for January? Is it because, for example, you've got an influencer campaign that you've been working on that's going to go live in January? Do you have an event that you're going to go to, and you think you're actually going to take $2,000 at that event? If you are going, are you going to have a new product launch and you think that's going to be really good, and you're going to have that slotted in? So it's kind of a combination of those two things. Sometimes you don't need to say what the how is, because that's kind of your overall business strategy and what's been going on, and you're expecting it to carry on a certain trajectory. And the other part of it is, if there are specific, big months that you're planning, or big anomalies in your sales figures, then that is the kind of thing that you might want to say, okay, let's explain a little bit as to the why, or the how rather.
That makes sense. Thank you. And yeah, it sounds like, again, it's not necessarily for anyone else. It's just for you to be able to explain, okay, as you said, this thing's happening this month, and this is
Yeah.
how I think it will impact my sales, for
Yes, exactly.
example.
Yeah. Yes.
Perfect. So let's talk a little bit about how you actually use your sales plan. So we're going to create it now. Let's say we're in December. We're going to create the plan in December.
Yeah.
Soon it will be a new year. We get going. How often do we need to be looking at the plan? How often do we need to be updating it? What do we do
Yeah.
with it? Because I think it's one of these things, I'm sure lots of us, myself included, have made a really good plan in December
Yeah.
and then forgot about it until July. I think it happens to the best of us.
Well, I think that I would want to tie it in with both a sales plan as well as a bit of a focus by month for the business. What am I going to be focusing on? Probably like a outline of a marketing plan, getting that going. So I think that once a month is a good amount to update it. So to be able to just take time once a month, stop what you're doing, go have a look at what was the plan for the month. Did I achieve it? If I did, what do I think helped with that? And if I didn't, what were the particular assumptions that didn't happen, or things happened differently than I thought? I like to do like a bit of a what worked well and added value each month, and also what would I do differently if I could do this month again. So inside my membership group, the Resilient Retail Club, we have kind of reflection sessions where we look back and then we take the time to look forward. So I would say once a month would be a great time to do that.
That makes sense. Thank you. And I guess when we're looking at it, are we just looking at, okay, I thought I was going to make £2,000 on Amazon this month and £1,000 on my website,
Yeah.
and these are my actual totals?
Yes. And then again, if you're using a stock plan, then that has implications on how much money you've got to spend on stock in later months. But in terms of the sales plan alone, I would update it with your actual numbers, but I would also have a little bit of a think why. So if it was way better than you thought it was, what happened? Oh, maybe I got to participate in eBay, for example, might offer some people on that platform like an opportunity to take part in a promotion. Did that work really well for me? Okay, some of the money came from that working really well. On the website, like did my traffic break down? Was that mostly from email, from social media? Like, what were the main things that really moved the needle? And I would record those, even if it's just like a couple of sentences per platform, because one thing I can guarantee is that this time next year you will absolutely never remember what it was and why your numbers were what they were. Even if you feel like you'll never forget it, it's always good to keep records, and then you have got that information. So when you're coming to do your forecasting and your planning for the following year, you can look back and go, oh yeah, do you know what? I wonder if they'll be doing that offer again, if I'll be able to participate. So I think that there's lots to be said there for just once a month updating it. If you want to check in mid-month and see how you're doing, then that's great, but once a month to really sit down and go through it and kind of update it.
That makes sense. Thank you. And I think also it's good because if you can see, for example, that, I don't know, you're getting a lot of your website traffic from Instagram, that might also inform your priorities for coming months. You might say, okay, I've actually been posting lots on LinkedIn, but it seems
Yeah.
people are finding me on Instagram. So maybe I need to think about
Focus.
spending more time
Yeah.
here, as an example.
Yes.
And would you be looking at amending your plan going forward? So let's say, for example, you forecast X amount of sales in January and you
Yeah.
massively exceed them.
Yeah.
And that would be great because as January, as we know, can be quite a tough month. Would you then look at the remainder of the year and say, okay, I did better than I thought in January. Maybe I need to raise my goal for future months, or would you sort of say, okay, maybe give it a couple of months before we
Yeah.
decide to make changes?
I always like to look at it on a quarterly basis for a reforecast, because I think if you change it, even when we say let's zoom out to look at the months instead of the weeks, things can happen. So one of the things that often messes stuff around is Easter. So some people might have a better March than they expected, but a tougher April, or vice versa, depending on where Easter fell compared to the year before. So I would almost rather you look at it like if January does really well, then like, okay, let's go into February. If February does really well, okay, all right. Well, in that case, you kind of might want to ask yourself, well, what do I think about March figures? Do they seem realistic? Like you can always tweak them if you want to kind of get a better idea of how you think it's going to go. But I wouldn't be too reactive after 1 month because you know, they can also be anomalies within the months.
That's helpful. Thank you. And what about if things go the other way? So let's say sales are way down, they're much
Yeah.
worse than you expected, or something happens. Let's say, I don't know, you have a supplier issue and suddenly your best-selling product is going to be out of stock for 10 weeks or
Mm-hmm.
something.
Yeah.
What do we do then? Because I'm assuming in that situation, we don't want to hold fast to our plan, perhaps, because
No.
yeah, we
Yeah.
we know there are things we need to consider, and what do we how does that impact our sales forecasting in that case?
I think in that particular case, what I would do is I would have an idea of what I thought that was going to do to the sales. So, for example, if your bestseller is going to be out of stock and that's half your sales, you might want to take those sales out of those few weeks. But you might equally then want to say to yourself, right, well, if I want the year to come out the same, I'm really going to have to push more in these months. And what can I do to kind of regain ground? Can I do pre-orders? Can I do like what can I do to get this money back? It's useful to kind of map it out, I think, ahead of time as well, so that you know, okay, well, I know this was the plan, but I didn't achieve it, but this is why, and this is what I think it cost me. And, you know, it can also help with conversations with, depends on how much influence you have over your suppliers. But like, for example, in big retailers, they would ask for compensation. For example, if you were supposed to be getting something and you weren't going to get it for several weeks. I know that's not always the same with small businesses because you don't get as much sway, but might be worth kind of bearing in mind. So I think if overall sales are much lower than you've been forecasting, I would want to know why. That would be my first question, would be like, put the panic aside. I know that when this happens, then people can go into this mode where they bury their head in the sand, or they tell themselves it's because they're terrible and they're doing a, you know, like everyone hates their product now and that's it. But actually, if you look at it, then if you can kind of pull it back to the numbers, like what's happening, is it a traffic problem, is it a conversion problem, what did you have last year that you were selling that's not selling this year, is it that your range hasn't moved on, you don't have new products compared to last year, so that it feels a bit stagnant, or is it actually last year you had this one product that was doing 40% of your sales and this year the supplier failed to deliver it, or the supplier didn't have a new version of it, therefore you need to make decisions to say, right, well, what am I going to do about this, and what am I going, you know, how am I going to move this on? So I think that in that particular case, then digging into the why of what's not working it can be really beneficial as well. And yeah, you may want to write down your sales plan for future months just to kind of help you out so you don't feel like you're aiming for a really unrealistic number. But then you also want to try and do that digging into what's going on. And then also, I think this is the other beauty of a sales plan. And again, when you tie it in with a stock plan and a cash flow plan, like if you've got a couple of months where sales are a bit wobbly, then what that's going to have an impact on your business finances, probably if not immediately, then a little bit further down the road. Whereas if you've got a sales plan and then a stock plan and a cash flow plan, you can actually see that, and you can maybe say, right, well, I'm going to pull back, I'm not going to buy so much of I'm not going to spend so much on stock to offset the fact that my sales have been a bit lower. So therefore you can kind of keep yourself out of trouble a little bit, and also helps you make decisions about spending money in the business when you can actually see it all mapped out. And then you can say, right, well, worst case scenario, if these sales trend continues, okay, where can I cut costs out to try and keep things kind of under control? So it's, for me, it's a lot about that ability to look forward, which you just don't have if you don't have these plans.
Thank you so much. Because I think while it can be scary, particularly if things aren't going as planned, I agree with what you said earlier in this conversation, that it's just much more empowering if you know it's happening, first of all,
Yeah,
because you're tracking and you can see, okay, I'm down on last month or last year or whatever.
yeah,
Also that you can dig into the reasons behind it. And then, as you say,
yes,
you can make informed decisions. So
yeah,
I think while this might sound a little bit scary, I hope it doesn't, but it could. I think actually you're coming from a place of a lot more power if
yeah,
you know, okay, this is happening,
yeah,
rather than just, ticking on over and then realizing a few months down the line, oh, actually, I'm not where I wanted to be. And,
Yeah.
we're 3 quarters through the year or whatever it is.
Yeah, totally. I think knowledge is power. I really believe that. And I believe that it can be hard to look at these numbers sometimes because it can feel very confronting. And sometimes people just say, I just don't want to know. But you're always going to be in a stronger position if you do know and you look at these things, because there's so many times a way to just keep out of trouble if you just kind of make a few adjustments, which you just can't do if you've got no future view of what you think you're going to take or what you think your expenses are going to be. Then it's almost impossible to do it. So I think a sales plan is a great first place to start.
Well, thank you so much. You've answered so many questions about sales plans, Catherine. Thank you for tolerating all of my questions,
No,
going
I
into so
love
much
it.
detail, because I think it's so useful. And
Yeah.
whether you've had a sales plan every year and this is, all, what you do anyway, or if you've never even thought about creating a sales plan and you're about to go and do it, I think this has all been fantastic. And final question to finish on, because I'm hoping, Catherine, everyone's going to finish listening, go off and make their plans,
Yes.
is what would your number one piece of advice be when you're planning your sales for next year?
Just do it. Don't get hung up on, oh, do I think I'm going to take £1,900 in January, or is it going to be 1950? Like, don't worry about that. Like, I often tell the story about how one time when I worked in a big retailer that was like £100+ million retailer, and I had a new boss come in and we wanted to replan everything just to kind of like go over all the plans, make sure that we were happy. And we were just like going through the months, right? What do we think? March, 30 million? Yeah, 30 million. Okay, how's that going to split out? Okay, I reckon dresses is going to be half of that, tops is going to be this. We weren't spending hours and hours agonizing over each month and each number, because we just needed a framework that we could then start to work with. And I think this is the same with the planning. People start and then they go, oh, I don't know, seems really complicated. Say you're going to take £1,000 in every channel every month. If start with whatever seems realistic, feasible, just put a number in and then go from there. And then you'll see the benefits of being able to tweak it, and the more you spend time thinking about it, the more you're going to be able to come up with a realistic number, the closer you'll get, and the more you'll understand about your own business, which is hugely powerful and a great place to be.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome anytime.